Hearing and sight. As-sam'u wal-basar. The Shaykh mentioned these together in the Bughya, meaning usually when we learn the 13 attributes, we learn them all one by one. Each one is explained one by one. But in the Bughya, the Shaykh explained hearing and sight together. He grouped them. And when they were grouped here in this book, it wasn't because the Shaykh grouped them in the Bughya. Rather, that's what I sought to do. Based on the information that I had and the presentation I wanted to give, then I saw that what I should do is group them. And I didn't follow the Shaykh in that. But when I was reviewing once, I noticed in the Bughya he did that. So I was so happy to find that what I did was in compliance with what the Shaykh did. So the Shaykh, he mentioned these together in the Bughya. It is a mental necessity that sama', hearing, and basar, or ru'ya, sight, are eternal, everlasting attributes of Allah, unlike our hearing and sight. We already said previously that sight has two names, al-basar and al-ru'ya. And we said that several attributes of Allah have more than one name, like will, you can call it irada or mashi'ah, and power, you can call it qudra or quwwah, and other attributes, like kalam also has other names. You can call the kalam al-qawl, or you could call it al-kalima, or al-kalimat, or al-Qur'an even. If Allah were not attributed with them, the hearing and the sight, he would be deaf and blind, which are defects because he is alive. So if he's alive, then either he can hear or he's deaf. And if he's alive, then either he can see or he's blind. Remember, hearing and deafness are valid after considering life. And seeing and blindness are valid after considering life. If life is not considered, then neither of those opposites are considered. This is the mental argument for the hearing and sight. So they were gathered together, hearing and sight, because their argument is the same and their proof is the same. Yani the ayah from the Quran or the ayats from the Quran, the hadiths of the Prophet, they come together. As-Sami'ul Basir, wa huwa as-Sami'ul Basir. He is the hearer and the seer. So this is thus, meaning like that, is the mental argument for the hearing and sight. They have the same argument. And this is also the same argument for the speech, but speech has its own details, so it has its own chapter. What's the argument? The argument is, if Allah were not attributed with them, he would be attributed with a defect. That's the argument. That's the base of the argument. If he weren't attributed with these attributes, he'd be attributed with a defect. And it's impossible that he'd be attributed with a defect. So he must be attributed with hearing, or else he'd be deaf. And he must be attributed with sight, or else he'd be blind. And he must be attributed with speech, or else he'd be dumb. So it's the same argument. But speech has its own details. So it's not going to be included here in this chapter. And speech has its own proofs. But hearing and sight, they have the same argument and they come together in the proofs too. So they got collected in one section. An-Nasafi said, Al-Wahidu al-Qadimu al-Hayyu al-Qadiru al-Alimu al-Sami'u al-Basiru al-Sha'i al-Murid. The one, or the unique, the eternal, the alive, the powerful, the knowledgeable, the hearer, the seer, the willing. And by now you're used to this style that's being employed here, which is differentiating between the attribute and the adjective and the verb. We're differentiating between all these things. So the attribute is sama', hearing. The adjective is sami', hearer. The verb is yasma', hears. So in this excerpt right here, these are all adjectives. Not the attributes and not the verbs, but the adjectives. Adjective means descriptive name. They are not senses, these attributes, hearing and sight. They are not senses, which are powers that exist in the creatures, in the creations. Yani, that's what senses are. Senses are powers that exist in the creations. Our senses are powers of ours. And Allah's attributes are not powers of His. So let a person refrain from saying he has the power to hear. He has the power to see. He has the power to speak. This is corrupted talk when it comes to speaking about God Almighty. You could say that for the creature. You can't say it for Allah because His attributes are not powers. Don't forget what the scholars said. They said the science of the creed is the science that is most in need of precise statements. Science of the creed is the creed that requires mostly of all sciences exact statements. When we hear a sound, we hear by vibrations and sound waves with an ear and an ear canal. But I still want to know how the scholars knew about sound waves. That's not clear for me. Maybe they deduced it somehow. Maybe, I don't know if they deduced it by echo or if they deduced it by water ripples somehow. How did they know there are airwaves, sound waves? I don't know. I asked, I didn't get an answer. We hear by vibrations and sound waves with an ear and an ear canal. Sound waves being translated from tamawuj, the tamawujul hawa. Tamawuj means waves. Tamawujul hawa, the waves of the air, airwaves. It says sound waves here means airwaves. The realization of the heard thing happens at some moment for us. When seeing, we use nerves, veins, and moving light that exists between the seer and the seen. Yes, we see, Yani, when we see something as creations, if I see something that's away from me, I'm talking about seeing normally. I'm not talking about seeing supernaturally. Then there's a circuit. The circuit is the light. The light enables me to see the object over there. That's like circuit. When we hear, if I hear a sound, so if there's a car all the way out there, how did I hear that car all the way out there where I am? Because there's a circuit. The circuit is the air. The air fluctuates and reaches me. How do I see this? There's a circuit, which is the light. That's for creations. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala hears and sees unlike the creations. To the contrary, the hearing and sight of Allah have no beginning. His hearing does not happen when the sound happens and does not need sound waves. For Allah to hear without an ear is not mentally impossible. It is perfection for Him, just as He knows all things without a heart. And He sees Himself and His attributes without a pupil or any other organ. Abu al-Muzaffar said, وَأَن تَعْلَمَ أَنَّ لَهُ حَيَاةً وَقُدْرَةً وَعِلْمًا وَإِرَادَةً وَكَلَامًا وَسَمْعًا وَبَصَرًا. And that you know that He has life, power, knowledge, will, speech, hearing, and sight. So what's that? Those are the attributes, not the adjectives and not verbs. Whatever is related to hearing is called heard. That's more. And whatever is related to sight is called seen, mubsar or mar'i. Yani, if the sight of Allah is called basar, then whatever is related to it is called mubsar. Because Arabic is a language of patterns. That's where your sarf comes in. And if the name of the attribute is ru'ya, then what's related to it is called mar'i. They both mean the same, seen. Some scholars say Allah hears all heard things and sees all seen things, created or not. Yani, he sees and hears what's not created because he sees himself and he's not created. And he hears his own speech and it's not created. So he hears and sees all things heard and all things seen, created or not created. Others say Allah hears and sees everything. So then there's a question, which one is stronger? Which way to say it is stronger? Is it stronger to say he hears all heard things and sees all seen things? Or is it stronger to say he hears and sees everything? Some said this one is stronger. Some said that one is stronger. And some said both of them are equal. But Abu al-Muzaffar, the way he talks makes it that they're both equal, because he gives you an example of the word, or using the word knowledge. Is it valid to say Allah knows everything? Yeah, that's easy. It's common. And is it valid to say Allah knows everything known? Yeah. So which one is better? Neither one's better. They are the same. He knows everything known, and he knows everything. And so like that, some of them would say, it's the same. Whether you say he sees everything seen, or he sees everything, he hears everything heard, or he hears everything. No sound is hidden from him, even if it is very low or very far from us. His hearing is eternal, and the eventual heard matters are created, not the uncreated heard ones. The uncreated heard ones are not created, like his speech. Whoever has ears or eyes is composed of parts, and hence is a body with length, width, depth, and limits. Whoever has these needs someone who specified him with them. That is why it is not permissible to attribute an ear to Allah. Concerning some hadiths, the Shaykh said, if a statement such as لا ينظر الله إلى من فعل كذا, literally, Allah does not look at whoever does such and such, it means that Allah will not honor such a person, but in fact will degrade and belittle him. And it definitely does not refer to Allah seeing with an organ or not seeing something. It doesn't also refer to Allah not seeing something. Just as this supplication does not refer to something he does not hear. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa' wa du'a'in la yusma' wa nafsin la tashba' wa qalbin la yakhsha'. O Allah, certainly I seek refuge with you from knowledge that does not benefit, a supplication unheard. So that doesn't mean that there's something Allah doesn't hear, because it means a supplication unaccepted, unanswered. And I seek refuge with you from an insatiable self. That means a self that's never satisfied. And I seek refuge with you from a heart that does not fear. So like this, وَدُعَاءٍ لَا يُسْمَعْ, I seek refuge with you from a supplication unheard. This doesn't prove that there is something that Allah doesn't hear. And likewise, any hadith, and there are a number of them, that says, Allahu la yanzuru ila man fa'ala kadha, if you translate it literally, Allah does not look at whoever does such and such. That doesn't prove that there's something that he doesn't see. The Mu'tazila said that he does not see himself. The Mu'tazila said that God does not see himself. That's atheism. And many of them said that he does not see anything at all, and that's atheism too. So when we deal with the Mu'tazila, they make us tackle atheism in a detailed way. Their atheism is more advanced than a standard atheist, actually. The standard atheist just says God doesn't exist, and he has his different arguments. Mu'tazili is denying the existence of God without saying God doesn't exist. The Mu'tazili al-Ka'bi claimed that describing him with hearing and sight means that he is knowledgeable about what is heard and seen. Al-Ka'bi, he said, Allah doesn't hear or see. So if it were said to him, how do you explain وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ? He's the hearer and the seer. His ta'wil, his interpretation of that is that it means he knows what's heard and he knows what's seen. According to that, but before that, this argument, though, is futile. This is futile. There's no need to say that, because to say he knows what's heard and he knows what's seen, it means he has an attribute called knowledge. If he has an attribute called knowledge, then what's wrong with having an attribute called hearing and sight? The reason they want to deny the hearing and sight is because they want to deny that he has attributes in the first place. The Mu'tazila say Allah doesn't have attributes. So in the process of denying his attributes, they would deny that he hears or sees. So when challenged, how could you deny he hears and he sees? What about وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ? He's the hearer and the seer. They say this means he knows what's heard and what's seen. So then it would be said, so that means you confirm an attribute. You went through all this trouble to deny the attributes just to confirm an attribute? Shut your mouth. Now you might say, but is that really what he's saying? Because it looks like that's a contradiction. It's a clear contradiction there. Would he say that? Yes, he would. Don't forget, and this is very important, whenever you have a creed that's contrary to the creed of Ahlus Sunnah, you will contradict yourself. You will contradict yourself inevitably. So don't be surprised when the deviant one says a blatantly contradictory statement. You might say, he can't be that dumb. No, he could be. So according to that, according to what he said, what they worship is like what Ibrahim forbade his father from worshiping. Since they want to deny that Allah hears or sees, then they worship what Ibrahim forbade his father from worshiping, as we are told by Allah in his saying, yani when Allah told us what Abraham said, إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ وَلَا يُغْنِي عَنْكَ شَيْئًا. When he said to his father, "O my father," or "O father of mine, why do you worship what does not hear, nor see, and does not benefit you in any way?" So when a Mu'tazili says Allah doesn't hear or see, he doesn't have hearing or sight, then they worship something like what Abraham forbade his father from worshiping. Whoever negates these attributes is not a Muslim, nor the one who says that Allah hears with an ear, or hears like the creations, or sees with an eye. Explicit textual proof for the hearing and sight includes the saying of Allah, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. And he is, the word is missing, and he is the hearer of all, the seer of all. That is also in the hadith listing the perfect names of Allah. That is also in the hadith listing the perfect names of Allah, As-Sami'ul Basir. So there's a proof from the Quran and a proof from the Hadith. See how the proof, those two come together. And the sama is always mentioned before, the hearing is always mentioned before the sight. I asked Sheikh Samir, do you know why the hearing is always mentioned before the sight? He said, no. We say once the world was created, Allah saw it with his eternal, unchanging sight. We do not say that Allah eternally saw the world, for that implies that the world is eternal. Why? Because for something to be seen, it has to exist. For something to be seen, it has to exist. So if Allah saw the world eternally, that would mean the world is eternal. So we therefore do not say that Allah saw the world eternally. We say that when the world came into existence, Allah saw it with his eternal sight, his eternal unchanging sight. His seeing it when it comes into existence doesn't change his sight, does not make his sight change. Just like he will know about it after it comes into existence. It's coming into existence doesn't make his knowledge change. The creations coming into existence doesn't make his speech change, doesn't make his power change, doesn't make any attribute of his change. Someone might ask, if we are allowed to say that Allah knew about the creation eternally, why are we not allowed to say that Allah saw the world eternally? And this case is an important case because the beginner might assume this statement and he'll just say Allah saw the creations eternally and he heard the creations eternally, because we do say he knew about the creations eternally. The answer is comparing sight to knowledge is not valid in this case, here in this case. To say it's not valid, so this is an open statement here. So let's qualify it so that it's less susceptible to criticism. Comparing sight to knowledge here, let's say, in this way is not valid. Because there is a way to compare sight to knowledge, just not here. So comparing sight to knowledge in this way is not valid, because knowledge is related to what exists and what does not exist. So you can know something that doesn't exist. That's why it's valid to say he knew the creations in eternity. Because you can know, because something that doesn't exist can still be known. While sight only pertains to what exists. So it's not valid to say he saw the creations in eternity. So they can't be compared in this way. And likewise, hearing. If something does not exist, it would not be seen or heard, though it can be known. Then how could hearing and sight be compared to knowledge? In what way could they be compared? They could be compared by both of them being realization. Knowledge is a particular realization, and hearing is a particular realization, and seeing is a particular realization. And this, so that's one, they can be compared this way. Also, another way they can be compared is to say, just like knowledge doesn't require for the known thing to have edges. If you know something, does the thing you know have to have edges? Doesn't have to have edges. It's not a condition to know it that it has edges. In this way, also, sight is similar. We say it's not a condition that something has to have edges to be seen. That's going to come back when we talk about seeing Allah. So in this way, they are similar. Also, it's not a condition that something has to have edges to be heard. Just like it's not a condition that it has edges to be known. Wa subhanallahi wa bihamdih. Any question there? Speech. Al-kalam. This is the 13th attribute. The kalam, speech of Allah, is an eternal, everlasting, necessary attribute of His self. The mental argument that he must be ascribed with speech is that had he not been, he would be abkam, dumb or mute. You see, those mean the same. Dumb means mute, silent, not speaking. Mute means not speaking, silent, which is a deficiency and imperfection. Deficiency and imperfection are impossible for him. This is the same argument for hearing and sight. And Nasafi said, وَهُوَ مُتَكَلِّمٌ بِكَلَامٍ هُوَ صِفَةٌ لَهُ أَزَلِيَّةٌ لَيْسَ مِنْ جِنْسِ الْحُرُوفِ وَالْأَصْوَاتِ وَهُوَ صِفَةٌ مُنَافِيَةٌ لِلسُّكُوتِ وَالْآفَةِ. He is a speaker by a speech that is an eternal attribute of his. It is not a type of letters and sounds. It is an attribute that negates speechlessness and imperfection. It is valid to say that Allah is a mutakallim, speaker, but that's not one of his names. That's a description. You can describe him as a speaker, and it's not a name of his. And it is valid to say that Allah is a qa'il, a speaker or a sayer. And it's valid to say that Allah is a mukhbir, an informer. And that he mentions. It's valid to say that Allah mentions. All of this refers to the same attribute, speech. On the other hand, it is not valid to say that he is a natiq, an utterer or a pronouncer. He did not ascribe to himself utterance, nutuq. He ascribed to himself kalam, speech, and qawl, saying. These expressions refer to an eternal attribute that is also called Quran, as we shall see. Its meaning, the meaning of this attribute is mentioning. Dhikr. Yani the meaning of speech is mentioning and informing or telling. Ikhbar. Not uttering with letters and sounds. And Nasafi said, Wallahu ta'ala mutakallimun bi Wallahu ta'ala mutakallimun biha amirun nahim mukhbir. Allah the Exalted is a speaker by this attribute, a commander, a forbidder, and an informer. Add the word and an informer. Although all of these meanings are understood from the Book of Allah, these meanings of commanding, forbidding, informing, all of these are understood from the Book of Allah. Although that's the case, it is not permissible to believe that the eternal speech is composed of parts. God's speech is one speech that does not accept multiplication and is not composed of different parts. Rather, the eternal speech is referred to by using verbs of past, present, and future tense. Yani, we talk about God's eternal speech using created language. We use created language to talk about God's uncreated speech. In the process of our using created language, we're going to use past tense verbs and present tense verbs and future verbs, although time is not related to God's speech. It is valid for us to do this. It came in the Quran. As well as commands. As well as commands, we use verbs of command verbs to talk about God's speech. The speech of Allah is a confirmed attribute of His self. The speech of Allah that is a confirmed attribute of His self is not segmented, not made of parts, nor compounded. Just as his life is an attribute confirmed for himself and is not divided nor interrupted. The speech of the human is a sound relying on exits and interruptions that start and stop. Exits means articulating spots in the mouth, coming in the form of languages and letters. That's created speech. In the explanation of Jam' al-Jawami', Az-Zarkashi said, وَكَمَا يُعْقَلُ مُتَكَلِّمًا وَلَا مَخَارِجَ لَهُ وَلَا أَدَوَاتٍ كَذَلِكَ يُعْقَلُ كَلَامًا لَيْسَ بِحُرُوفٍ وَلَا أَصْوَاتٍ. Just as we conceive the existence of a speaker who has no exits or instruments, we likewise conceive a speech that is not of letters or sounds. Sounds are bodily qualities. Yani sounds are properties of bodies. His speech is not a sound that happens by the movement of air or the meeting of organs. It is not composed of letters produced by the movement of the tongue or that stop because of closing the lips. وَلَا يُنَبِّئُكَ مِثْلُ خَبِيرٍ. No one can tell you or inform you like someone who is all-knowing. The all-knowing one, his speech is unlike the speech of anyone. Sheikh Zakaria al-Ansari said with a streamlined translation, every measurement or amount has two extents. And every measurement has two extents. Whichever is its beginning, whichever extent is its beginning, the opposite is its end. The human is like that. He has two extents. Since the human stands upright, his head is his beginning and his feet are his end. From there, the first exit for his speech would be the lips, starting from the outer skin and ending at the teeth. The second would be the tongue, beginning at the front teeth and ending at the throat. Yani the tongue extends from the teeth to the throat. The throat, which is the third exit, it begins at the end of the tongue and ends towards the chest. Had his situation been reversed, the human, then this arrangement of exits would be reversed. And since the material of sound or voice is air that comes from the inside, then its beginning, the beginning of this air is from the bottom of the throat, and its end is from the outside of the lips. Had God's speech been utterance, pronunciation, that would have come in the Quran. Anything related to this attribute is called mukhbarun anh, told or told about. He is truthful in all that he says. So truthfulness is one of the attributes of God. Qul sadaqa Allah. Say Allah said the truth. Or say Allah was truthful. And his truth, his attribute of truthfulness goes back to his attribute of speech. He is truthful in all that he says, and he does not break his promise. He is a promiser, and he's a threatener, and his promise and his threat go back to his attribute of speech. God said, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. Allah spoke a speech to Moses, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This means that Allah made him hear his eternal everlasting speech, and Moses understood whatever he understood. The speech is eternal, and Moses and his hearing are created. We believe that he heard the eternal speech, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, without it being a letter sound, or specific language, just as the believers shall see Allah in the hereafter without him being made of particles. Subhanallahi wa bihamdih. Know that the saying of Allah, which is his eternal speech, that is not a letter, sound, or language, was expressed in the arranged, created verses of the Quran revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It was likewise expressed in the verses of the Torah revealed to Moses, and in the Injil revealed to Jesus, and in the Zabur revealed to David, and other books of revelation. These books are expressions of the eternal speech that is not associated with time. Expressions of the eternal speech means they refer to the eternal speech. What does refer to mean? This is very common concept. For example, if you have a model car, a model Lamborghini, you might say, this is a Lamborghini. So you'll call that model just by what it's representing. It's not really a Lamborghini though, but because of what it represents, you would call it. You'd say, this is a Lamborghini. Or, for example, you might draw a stick figure, and then you say, this is Fulan. It's not Fulan. But because this stick figure is representing him, then you would say, it is him. That's valid. That's normal. So that's the case of the Quran. And that's the case of what refers to the uncreated speech of God. There are created things that refer to something else. What are they referring to? They are referring to an uncreated speech. These books are expressions of the eternal speech that is not associated with time. Had there been many, many more books of revelation, they would never be able to encompass the meanings of the eternal speech. Just as there is no way to encompass what is known to Allah in expressions, or to encompass with expressions what is subject to his power. Yani, this Quran, it's not valid to say what's in the Quran from Al-Fatiha to An-Nas is everything that Allah says. It's not valid. Because this document that starts with Al-Fatiha and ends with An-Nas, it's created, has a beginning and an end. So how could something that has a beginning and an end encompass something uncreated? That's impossible. So that's just like it's not valid to say that everything that's under God's control could be documented. You can't document it because Allah has power to do anything possible. So there's no way to document that. It's just like it's not possible to say everything that Allah knows can be documented. That's not possible. So had there been many, many more books of revelation, they would never be able to encompass the meanings of the eternal speech. Just as there is no way to encompass what is known to Allah in expressions, or to encompass with expressions what is subject to his power. وَلَوْ أَنَّ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْ شَجَرَةٍ أَقْلَامٌ وَالْبَحْرُ يَمُدُّهُ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ سبعة أبحر ما نفدت كلمات الله. Had there been in the earth pens, the number of trees, and the sea were reinforced with 7 more seas, the words of Allah would not be depleted. Here, some of our sheikhs probably won't accept. I think that's though due to language barrier. But nevertheless, there are competent speakers of English though. They are competent speakers of English, but they might not accept to say kalimatullah, words of Allah here. Words of Allah here, kalimatullah, means Allah's attribute of speech, which is one attribute. Whatever does not come to an end in itself is eternal without beginning. That's what the ayah is telling us, that the speech of God doesn't end. Had there been in the earth pens, the number of trees, and the sea were reinforced with 7 more seas, okay, the pens would have to be created. The seas would have to be created. Created means has a beginning. So we're talking about something that has a beginning here, which is pens with their ink starting to write something. They're starting to write something. What they are starting to write, they would never be able to write all of what they started to write. They can't finish writing all of what they started writing, which is, what did they start writing? According to the meaning of the ayah, they started, if they started writing the speech of God. Yani, Allah speaks with an uncreated speech, and Allah has revelation in created language. This created language refers to God's speech. So what if the trees of the earth were pens and the oceans were ink, and these trees were dipped into this, yani these pens were dipped into this ink and then started writing the speech of God? They won't be able to write all of it. Even though they started, they won't be able to. Even if they ran out, the speech of God won't run out. This is the meaning here. If the speech of God doesn't run out, what does that mean? It means it's everlasting. And the speech of God is everlasting by itself. And whatever does not come to an end in itself is eternal without a beginning. So then this verse proves that God's speech is uncreated. This proves that the speech of God is uncreated, has no beginning. Kalamullahi ta'ala ghayru makhluq. The plurality in these verses, the word kalimat, words, is for glorification. Just as Allah refers to himself as nahnu, we, for glorification. So the same sheikhs, they won't accept words. I'm not like belittling them here. I'm just saying they won't accept the word words in English, but they would accept the word we for Allah because it's familiar to them. So that's why I'm saying I think it's the language barrier. I think it's because it's too unfamiliar to them, so they're not comfortable to use words with an S to refer to the speech of Allah Ta'ala, because the speech of Allah is not made of pieces. So in Arabic, it's valid to call God's speech kalimat. Kalimat. That's for sure confirmed. Someone might say you can't use the word words. Okay. Let's say if you can't use it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work, though. That's still something else. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. Because, as you know, it is possible that a word, its meaning works and it's still not permissible to use it. So what I'm saying to you is that I think the word words in English, it works. Now, someone says not permissible, then that's another thing. The speech of Allah is one speech. This verse is also proof that Allah's speech is not sounds or letters, because it proves that his speech is eternally unending. Wa subhanallahi wa bihamdihi